Hi, my name is Maureen Hogan, and in this lecture, we're going to learn about what research has taught us about the brain and memory. Another thing that we have learned about the brain and how it works is that the brain is a parallel processor. Parallel processing is the ability of the brain to simultaneously. Another thing to understand about how the brain functions is that it is survival oriented, and the search for meaning the search for meaning takes place through patterning. So patterning are observations that people make through their senses, and they're organized into meaningful categories by the observer. The brain is designed to perceive and generate patterns, and it resists meaningless things or meaningless patterns that you try to impose on it. Humans will try to detect patterns all the time because it makes learning easier. For example, if you're given driving directions, let's say this is before the time of Google Maps, um, you're given driving directions and you're in a city that's not familiar with to you, you could try to memorize each turn, and it will be very challenging. But if you see a pattern, for example, turn left, then right, it will make it much easier to remember. When students seek patterns in the world around them, they see order instead of chaos, and that builds confidence in their understanding of how the world works and gives them a feeling of control. And it's really important for teachers to give students that feeling of control. So students who are given complex patterns to discover and interpret, they're sending their brains on an important search for meaning. And at the same time, they're building connections that are vital to higher learning and critical thinking and problem solving skills. And because of that, emotions are critical to the heart of patterning. So we do not simply learn things. What we learn is influenced and organized by our emotions trying to make meaning. So all of this kind of all works together to help us understand how learning occurs. Emotions are feelings that color our lives and allow us to experience all of the joys and sorrows of life. Never being able to feel the pleasure of eating a hot fudge sundae, the regret of making an unkind comment, the joy that comes from seeing an old friend, the grief of losing a loved one, or um, the if you've ever been to like the Grand Canyon, just that feeling of awe. Without all that, would make our lives quite bland and meaningless. Um, Dr. Paul Ekman, who is considered an expert and has done a lot of research on the field of motion, identified four emotions, and these four core basic emotions. One is fear. Another one is anger, sadness, and finally enjoyment. Then there's dimensions of each of those, but those are the four basic emotions in life. And intense emotion triggers intense memories. And how that works in the brain is that when you feel intense emotion, it raises stress hormones. And then those hormones trigger the amygdala, which, as we saw in the last lecture, is very important to memory and learning. The amygdala then triggers the hippocampus, and that forms memories. And then the frontal lobe, where a lot of the thinking occurs, it engages and it decides if those memories are important or not. And even though the brain is we talked about how there's the brain is a parallel processor and it's constantly looking at things. There's significant differences between the left and right hemispheres of the brain. And that's why the brain processes wholes and parts differently. In a healthy person, the two hemispheres are interactive, and they might, so for example, your right brain will look at this picture, and it will say, that there's two pieces, the apple is cut in half. The right brain will look at things like the creativity of it, the color and how, all of that plays and together. And then the brain comes together and processes those wholes in parts. Another really important thing to understand about how the brain absorbs information is that it only processes information that it's really aware, that it's directly aware of. It does process information that is beyond the field of your attention. So, for example, while you're sitting here, you might have your phone sitting to the left of you or the right of you, and it's peripheral, and you're kind of aware that that phone is there, but right now you're focused on this. So in order for you to learn, you actually have to focus your attention and your peripheral perception on whatever it is that you're trying to learn. But given that learning always involves both the conscious and unconscious, and this is a very famous image of how we look at the conscious mind, or that thinking that we're aware of, and the unconscious mind. And all of that came out of some psychologist theory like Sigmund Freud, who said that the unconscious plays a huge impact on our everyday behaviors. And we learn much more than we consciously understand that we're learning.